Welcome to Roots and Peaks. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Ty Gagne. Ty is the author of two of my favorite books, The Last Traverse. This is sort of out of order, actually. And Where You'll Find Me. So Where You'll Find Me came first, and then Last Traverse. Ty, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Ken. Thank you for having me.
So, like I said, I sort of said them out of order. Where You'll Find Me was your first book, correct?
It was.
Why were you interested in writing about the topics that you write about?
Well, I've always been interested in stories out of the White Mountains. I was really taken by the book Not Without Peril by Nicholas Howe. And any opportunity I get to tip my hat to Mr. Howe's work, I do that. And that really inspired me to start paying closer attention to accidents in the White Mountains. I've always been an admirer of mountaineering literature. And when I was much younger, had always thought about the idea of writing a book someday. But when you're young, you don't necessarily have a story. And that's really kind of the evolution of the first book, which actually started out as a presentation that I had put together for work as part of my job.
So let's go into that. What do you do for work?
So I work for a public entity risk pool in New Hampshire. We serve New Hampshire local governments, school, municipal, and county throughout the state of New Hampshire. And we basically finance their risk and manage their claims, but also have a really heavy education and training, risk management, and HR consulting component to that as well.
So how long have you been in the risk management business?
I think I started there early 2000s. It's a topic I've always been interested in. And really what you see here with the writing is a blend of my personal passion of the mountains and climbing and my professional work that I do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that comes through loud and clear. For those who haven't read them, can you explain in your own words what the books are like and maybe just a brief summary of them?
Sure. Well, both books really focus on decision making and risk. Again, they're based out of the White Mountains. Where You'll Find Me is the story of Kate Matrasova, who in February of 2015 attempted to do the Northern Presidential Traverse, starting from Appalachia Trailhead in Randolph. And her plan was to culminate that traverse in Ammonoosuc Ravine near the Cog. Tragically, Kate was overtaken by a very extreme weather system that had moved in, and she did not survive that ordeal. And so I write a lot about who Kate was as a person, why she was there, because I focus on the why and wanting to understand that and how we can apply that to our own lives, whether we're in the mountains or not. And also to share the story of search and rescue, because in New Hampshire, search and rescue is really unique and special. Conservation officers from New Hampshire Fish and Game work alongside numerous volunteer teams. These are volunteers that will leave their jobs and their families or whatever it is they're doing to go out and help fellow hikers and climbers. The second book, also based out of the White Mountains, is really focused on Franconia Ridge. And that is the story of two friends who were also co-workers, James Osborne and Fred Fredrickson, who attempted to do a traverse of the Franconia Ridge from Haystack to Mount Lafayette in February of 2008. And they were overtaken again by a severe weather event on the ridge. And they were forced to shelter overnight and attempting to self-rescue the next morning. They hadn't planned to stay out. Again, tragically, Fred did not survive that ordeal. James Osborne did. And so I talk about their story and, again, the story of search and rescue and apply it to decision-making and risk management.
One of my favorite things about your books is how you treat the tragic figures in them. I mean, obviously, Kate and Fred didn't make it through their ordeals. Can you talk a little bit about how you find a balance, or how you how you decide to speak about these people who are very smart people who made some very bad decisions or perhaps got into circumstances that allowed them to make bad decisions and still keep their humanity?
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. Well, I think in these cases and in all of these cases that we hear about when people require um, a search and rescue effort, they're going up there with the best of intentions. Some of whom are unprepared to be there, inexperienced to be there. But I don't think we should define them based on this one thing. And I've made mistakes in the mountains, and I think I bring that humility and that perspective and the respect for the people I'm writing about, whether it's search and rescue or victims or survivors, and obviously respect for the families and the friends of the people who know them better than anybody. Many of whom, in these cases, are grieving.
If people are watching this sort of currently, we've recently just had a terrible tragedy in the White Mountains as well. And it's unfortunately, I was online sort of looking at people's responses to Emily's disappearance initially. For those who don't know, Emily was found several days later and had perished on that same ridge where Fred died, or maybe not on the ridge, but off of the ridge. It it is fascinating to me how people sometimes forget that this is a real person that you're talking about. Um, and some of the conversations went to kind of a dark place, which I was very sad about. But the great thing about the community is an equal number of people were, defended Emily and were very concerned about her family, about her, about search and rescue. So it really is quite an amazing community, I think.
It is, and I think when these things happen, we can be quick to judge. And I've had people ask me, "What was your first thought when you heard that Emily was missing?" And my first thought went to Emily, recognizing, knowing what the weather was at that point, and that there were going to be some desperate hours, and that hopefully she was going to be able to untangle from that situation, and to her mother, who was really the last person to see her and drop her off on what was supposed to be um, an achievement on her part and a celebration of her 20th birthday. And I think sometimes when people just rush to judgment, I think part of that is trying to keep your own stuff at arm's length. I mean, I'm hard pressed to believe that the people that were offering harsh criticism have not made mistakes before, whether they were in the mountains or somewhere else, and things get away from us. That's, again, I think we can talk about why Emily was there and whether she was prepared or not, experienced or not. But my focus is, well, what can we learn from these things that we can apply to our own passions, our own pursuits, our own activities.
Well, and to bring it back, that's one of the things that I love the most about your books is they are full of information and full of knowledge and hopefully allow people to be safe, make good decisions, especially when winter hiking, because it can be, as we know, rather dangerous.
Yeah, and I try to write it in a way that this applies to all of us, whether we're at 5,000 feet above tree line or driving our car, or again doing whatever it is that we're doing, whether at work or home or elsewhere. So yes, they are stories out of the mountains, but my hope is that they connect with people who aren't necessarily passionate about hiking or climbing.
Sure, so that they can take some of those lessons into different experiences.
Right.
And I loved at the beginning how you spoke about how you're bringing your passion and your professional business together here. Obviously, for me, hiking is very much a passion. And in this case, filmmaking is a profession as well. So I'm bringing those together. But in your case, with the idea of bringing hiking into risk management, was it ever a challenge to figure out the topics to write about, or did you know instantly what you were going to speak about and how you were gonna tell that story?
Well, I always knew I was going to write without judgment and in a way that talks about what happened and why these things happen. And as part of the why, doing a lot of research around decision making, risk tolerance, and again, I'm working in that realm every day. So I knew I have a really strong connection to mountain writing. That's I love to read books like that out of the Himalayas and the Karakoram and Denali and elsewhere. So that connection was quite easy. And what I try to explain to groups, I talk to hiking groups, and I talk to groups and organizations that don't have anything to do with hiking. And what I talk about is that the dynamics that get us into trouble in the mountains are the same ones that get us into trouble at work, at home, elsewhere, driving, whatever it is, and vice versa. It really comes. Much of this comes down to human factors, the behaviors that we bring everywhere we go, how we view challenges, how we view goals, objectives, those kinds of things, and how emotion can often influence some of the things that we do that might leave others scratching their head asking why. Because I don't think it's so simple to say should not have been there, should not have done that. There are reasons why we do these things, and that's what I wanted to explore.
We also spoke briefly off of this call about um, how there are a lot more near misses than you might expect. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Sure, sure. And I'm smiling because I've met so many people with so many interesting stories since Where You'll Find Me came out. But one of the things I did in the prologue of Where You'll Find Me, and whenever I open a presentation, I'm owning my own situation that I got myself into in the mountains, because I think it's really important to hold myself accountable, and be open about this if I'm writing about things that have happened to others. And at the conclusion of presentations, oftentimes I'll have a line of people who want to talk about their near miss, close call, whatever we want to refer to it as, in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. And so for the rescues that we hear about, and for the hundreds of thousands of people that go into the White Mountains every year, the majority of them go in and come out safely. But when we hear about these, we might have this perception that this happens all the time. And fortunately, it does not. But what does happen more often than not are these near misses. People that are going across, Franconia Ridge, and there's a sudden thunder and lightning storm. Getting hit by freezing rain in July on Mount Washington when they had only had a windbreaker and shorts and hiking shoes, and or that near stumble or fall that fortunately did not result in a break or a serious sprain, and people missing trails, cutoffs, intersections. It just happens a lot more than obviously what we know or that gets reported.
Yeah, certainly. One thing that I think for me differentiates the danger or the risk of winter hiking versus other forms of activities that are inherently dangerous or hiking itself is the risk of hypothermia. Could you speak a little bit about that? I know you speak in length in your books about that with both cases, but could you tell someone who hasn't read your books why hypothermia is particularly dangerous?
Sure. And this can happen every year. We think about hypothermia and colds and we apply it to late fall to early spring, but it's a year round threat. And basically what happens is as our body temperature drops, blood really returning from our outer extremities, like our arms and our legs and our head, where there's less insulation, it returns to the heart and it's cold. And so the heart sends a message to the brain like, hey, I don't like this, warm it up. And the body will go through vasoconstriction, which is your arteries and your veins will compress to keep blood flow at your core for your vital organs. One of the first places it's suppressed is in the frontal cortex of your brain. So just maybe to relate it more to all of us, if you feel the tips of your fingers getting numb or your toes getting cold, that's blood flow is really being restricted there. Warm blood is not getting there at the level or volume that it should. And so you're going to feel that. But in the frontal cortex of our brain, that's our decision engine. It's the executive functioning part of our brain. And as blood flow there is suppressed, that impacts our ability to make decisions. So we can grow apathetic, emotions get dulled. We can minimize those red flags or those complications and just, dismiss them, for lack of a better term. Our judgment is impaired. So it's really referred to as the silent killer in the backcountry because we don't realize it's happening to us because it's a very slow cognitive decline. And so when we read about and hear about the behavior of people who are in the backcountry and they're found in certain areas or their gear is discarded and we don't understand that, that's applicable to a hypothermic individual who's just doing things that we would not see as normal.
And things that we wouldn't think of doing ourselves if our brain was functioning correctly.
Right. I mean, if you're of normal core body temperature and you drop a glove, you want to get that glove back. If you're hypothermic or in the early stages and you drop a glove, it may not be that important to you.
Right. And those things can compound and add
Yeah.
up.
It's
very
often a
quickly.
series of what seem to be small events that just stack on top of the other until it collapses. And then we're dealing with a multitude of complications on top of everything else that's going wrong.
So again, going back to bringing together your passions and your work, what's something unexpected that you've learned through the process of writing these books?
That's a really good question. Well, as I've mentioned, I've met some really remarkable people um, within the search and rescue community. In particular, I've spent hundreds of hours sitting and talking with them about their stories and experiences. Obviously, the people that I'm involved, that I'm writing about, survivors, family members, that's a really meaningful and moving experience. So I think a lot, probably the humility of the search and rescue community, because these are backcountry experts, very, very good at what they do. Many of them climb all over the world. But you're sitting in their living room with them, having a cup of coffee and knowing what they've accomplished in the mountains, having admiration for that. And yet, it's like you're sitting with a member of your, a good friend or something like that. It's just, there's that ego, that edge, just, it's not there. They're just really good people and they work in the shadows. They seek no recognition whatsoever. And I think that's what I really like about sharing their stories.
And I think one thing that most people may not know is that a majority of them are volunteers and not receiving any payment, correct?
They are a fishing game. I talk to Jim Nealon quite often. He's the director of the Advanced Search and Rescue Team, the team leader. And he will tell you, and as he has told me on numerous occasions, that fishing game could not do what they do in the backcountry unless they were augmented by the volunteers. The level of gratitude that New Hampshire Fish and Game and the conservation officers have for the volunteer search and rescue community is it's at its highest level. They're so thankful for the partnerships.
All right. Switching topics just a little bit. This is a complicated question that I'm asking a simple answer for, which is always a recipe for disaster. But
Okay.
the reason it's a complicated question is I know that there's a lot of things that you need to do sort of in tandem in order to be safe while hiking in the winter. But if you could give a viewer just one thing to take away from your books or from this interview, what would you say is the number one most important thing to do to make sure that they are being safe if they decide to go out and hike during the winter?
Self and situational awareness. Who am I as a person? Uh, what drives me? What is the goal that I've set out to do? We can talk about hike safe and all of the essentials and the things you need to bring, but it's really knowing yourself before you arrive at that trailhead or establish that itinerary.
I've been seeing a lot of people talking about hike your own hike recently. Um, this sort of plays into that, I'm assuming, where you need to understand who you are, why you're out there, your limitations, and where and how you can push yourself appropriately.
Yeah, yeah. I think in particular, if you're a goal oriented person, or let's say you've set a goal to do the 48 in a certain amount of time, um, there, if you're unable or unwilling to modify that plan given changing conditions, you are assuming such a higher level of risk with that goal, because what you're telling yourselves is I must do this. I have to do this given the time frame that I've set for myself. And we can ignore higher summits forecasts, or fatigue or dehydration, changing weather conditions, and that can be to our detriment.
I think I know the answer to this question, but for those who haven't had the pleasure of speaking with you off of, outside of this interview or who haven't met you in person, does that mean that you would recommend people stay away from winter hiking?
No, it is my favorite form of outdoor recreation is climbing, climbing and hiking in the wintertime. It is absolutely beautiful. It's growing in popularity. Um, some people, there's probably mixed feelings about that, because often people will hike in the fourth season to avoid the crowds in the other three seasons. All I'm going to say is there are a multitude of resources out there available to us if we're going to venture into the fourth season. There are winter hiking and winter skills workshops, the Appalachian Mountain Club, Eastern Mountain Sports, International Mountain Equipment, Northeast Mountain Guides, Redline Guiding. I'm just naming a bunch um, off the top of my head, but they're out there, and I think it's just a recognition that there's a difference between the two. We can apply the same principles um, around managing those risks that we do in the other three seasons, but the fourth season, winter, can be a completely different situation, with more unforgiving, for sure.
Absolutely. The consequences can be quite a bit larger as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So we in all of these interviews, I'm doing a thing that I'm just calling three quick questions. So I'll give you the questions and kind of just answer the first thing that pops off the top of your head. And the first question is, what's one piece of advice you have for new hikers or someone that hasn't tried it before?
Find a mentor.
The next one is, what's your favorite hiking or backpacking trip that you've ever done?
I'm gonna get nostalgic for a minute, and my favorite hike was Rattlesnake Mountain near Squam Lake with my parents. Yeah, I love Mount Adams and Mount Lafayette in the winter. I love Crawford Notch in the wintertime from an alpine perspective, but that's where it all started. Really, for me, was Rattlesnake and the Ridgepole Trail, and so yeah, that sits deep for
That's
me.
such a wonderful hike too for people just starting out.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that for those watching this that don't know that hike, it's accessible. It's it's relatively easy in terms of hiking, short, and the payoff is amazing.
it is, and in the wintertime, it's so peaceful. But there are a lot of other big mountains north of there and around there, but I think that there's just something really special about that. And my wife and I have taken our kids there, and I'm hoping they'll take their children there someday. And yeah, I love it.
And finally, what's your favorite color?
My favorite color.
It's very
um,
it's very relevant. People want to
it
know.
is.
Yeah,
I think it's probably brown.
fair. Brown's a good color. Very earthy, very natural.
Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. Ty, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people find your books if they're interested?
I would strongly support people seeking those out at independent bookstores, wherever they may be. But I know that a number of them in New Hampshire have been hugely supportive of me, and I've been so grateful to get to know the owners of those stores and their staff. And we have to support our independent bookstores. They're critical parts of our community fabric for sure.
Absolutely agree. I'll make one other plug for you, which is if you're not much of a reader, but you're interested in Ty's books, they are also available. Are both of them available on audiobook?
They are. They are.
So I've read both and listened to both, and I think that it's a different experience, obviously, but listening to them is amazing as well.
Yeah, I think the audiobooks, that was just within the last year that happened. So people are looking for Kindle versions, and um, that's on the publisher's to-do list at some point. But we're also, I think the print copy is again supports independent bookstores for sure. So part of it is the reasoning is that as well.
Absolutely. And do you have anything else going on that you want to talk about or future projects?
Sure. I'm working on another writing project out of the White Mountains. I'm hoping it's out sometime in 2023. I don't want to set a predetermined deadline for that because I'm just trying to be open and flexible to the writing process.
Well, I would also imagine it's something where you want to give it enough time to tell the story the correct way.
Yeah, this one will take a lot of time, and it's carving that time out between family and work and writing time.
Ty, you do other things besides being an author?
Well, I love getting outside. I find that sometimes challenging to do just because of between work, family, and writing. But yeah, that's where I'd prefer to be is outdoors. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm right there with you. Thank you so much for joining us, Ty. And I will put some links into the bio if people want to check out where your book is, and maybe we'll connect offline and see if you have a favorite local bookstore that I can plug there too.
Great. There's a number of them I could rattle off. So sure, I will do that. Happy holidays to you, and thank you.